A U.S. Marine and his loyal service dog were quietly enjoying breakfast beneath the gentle morning sun. But suddenly, a small voice broke the calm. "Can I eat with you?" Turning around, they saw a little girl in a torn dress, barefoot and trembling. What happened next would not only leave the whole town speechless, but also touch hearts around the world. Before I tell you what happened next, can I ask you something small? If you believe every child deserves to feel safe, please tap that subscribe button. Most people scroll past stories like this, but your one click could help this message reach someone who truly needs it. Please subscribe. This is the story of Sergeant James Riley, a Marine who had served on multiple tours and carried the weight of war on his shoulders. Yet, it wasn't the battlefields that would test his courage the most. It was a simple moment of kindness that would change everything. On a quiet morning in a local park, Sergeant Riley and his service dog Max were about to witness a life-altering encounter. When a little girl whispered those 5 words, they had no idea just how much their simple gesture would mean. What happened next left an entire community changed forever. It was just another ordinary morning, the kind that comes with a stillness that only the early hours can offer. The sun had only just begun to climb in the sky, casting a soft golden glow across the small park where Sergeant James Riley had decided to start his day. There was no rush today, no deadlines, no orders to follow, just him and Max, his loyal German shepherd. Together, they had forged a bond that could never be broken. After returning from his most recent deployment, Riley had found himself struggling with something he never anticipated. The quiet. It was louder than any battlefield. The silence, so deafening, pressed in on him from all sides, making the world outside seem as foreign as the distant lands he had once fought on. The sounds of explosions, the rapid gunfire, the clatter of boots against gravel, they were no longer a part of his life. Instead, it was replaced with a silence so deep it felt almost suffocating. At first, he thought he could adjust, that his mind would eventually stop searching for something to fill the emptiness. But it never did. He and Max had fallen into a routine. Every morning, Riley would take his dog out for a quiet walk to clear his head, and then they'd sit together for breakfast in the park. This was their time. Max would sit beside him, eyes calm but watchful, as they shared the morning stillness. Riley had been trained for combat, to handle chaos, to operate under pressure. Yet, when he was back home, the simple act of sharing a quiet moment with his dog was what gave him a sense of peace. This morning felt just like any other. Riley didn't expect anything to disrupt the calm, but something was different this time. Riley could feel it in his bones. The moment felt too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. Max, ever alert, noticed it too. The dog's ears perked, his eyes scanning the park with a sense of purpose, as if sensing an unseen presence. Riley had seen Max react to things before, small shifts in the air, changes in the environment that only an experienced working dog could sense, but he had never seen him like this. It wasn't just the dog. Riley felt it too. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, an instinctual response that told him something was amiss. But what? There was no sound, no disturbance, no sign of danger. The park was as peaceful as it always had been. Still, there was an unsettling sensation building inside him, something he couldn't explain. He tried to shake it off, taking another bite of his sandwich, trying to focus on the calm. Max's presence helped. The dog was always steady, always there. Riley glanced down at his companion. Max's dark brown eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Riley saw a reflection of the bond they shared. They had been through so much together. They had both seen the worst the world had to offer: war, pain, loss. And yet, here they were, finding a semblance of peace in this quiet park. But then, the moment broke. Out of nowhere, a small voice pierced through the silence, so soft, so hesitant, it was almost imperceptible at first. "Can I eat with you?" Riley froze. His head snapped to the side, his military instincts kicking in immediately. His hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, but he stopped himself. This wasn't a threat. This was something entirely different. But what? A little girl stood just a few feet away, looking up at him. Her body was thin, and her clothes were ragged, her dress torn in several places. She was barefoot, her feet caked in dirt, her small frame trembling with fear. She looked no older than 8 or 9, but the fear in her eyes told a different story. Riley's mind raced. He didn't recognize her. She wasn't from around here. Where had she come from? Why was she alone? The park wasn't far from the main road, but it wasn't the kind of place where children wandered alone. This wasn't a place for kids to hang out. Something was off. Something didn't add up. The girl stood there, her small hands clasped nervously in front of her, her gaze shifting from the ground to Riley, and back again. Her posture was tense, like she was preparing for something she couldn't control, as if she was expecting rejection, expecting to be sent away. Riley's eyes softened, and he lowered his hand away from his sidearm. He wasn't in a threatening position anymore, but there was still something unsettling about the whole situation. It was strange. Why would a child ask to eat with him? A complete stranger? There was so much fear in her eyes, so much vulnerability. His heart ached at the sight. This wasn't just any child. This was someone who had seen hardship, who had likely experienced things a child shouldn't have to face. Riley had seen that look before, in the eyes of the young soldiers he'd fought beside. Eyes filled with fear and the weight of too much too soon. But this girl, she shouldn't have been carrying that weight. She was just a child. Before he could respond, she spoke again. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension in the air. "I'm really hungry," she added, her words almost lost to the soft rustling of the wind. Riley's heart tightened. The simplicity of her statement, the raw honesty in it, hit him harder than any explosion or firefight ever had. His training had prepared him to face combat, to navigate chaos and destruction, but nothing had prepared him for this moment, the vulnerability of a child, standing before him, desperately seeking comfort in a world that had failed her. Max, sensing his handler's tension, stood up, his ears alert and his eyes locked on the girl. The dog's stance was calm, but Riley could see the subtle shift in his posture, a sign that Max was paying attention, that something about the situation wasn't quite right. But it wasn't aggression, it was concern. Riley took a deep breath and let it out slowly, trying to calm himself. This wasn't the battlefield. This wasn't war. There was no enemy here, no mission to complete. But there was something else, the quiet realization that he had the power to do something in this moment. He wasn't just a Marine, he was a man, and he could choose to act with compassion, to offer something he had learned to give on the battlefield, kindness. He looked at Max and then back at the girl. His voice was steady, though his heart was racing. "Come on, sit with us." The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, Riley wasn't sure if she would actually approach him. But then, after a beat, she took a cautious step forward. Another step. Then, as if she was testing whether it was real, she slowly walked toward him and sat down beside him on the park bench. Riley didn't know what else to do, so he reached into his bag, pulling out another sandwich he had packed. He held it out to her, offering it silently. There was no judgment in his eyes, no questions, just a simple act of offering what he had. She hesitated, her gaze flickering from the sandwich to his face. She didn't speak for a moment, and Riley wasn't sure if she would take it. But then, finally, she did. She took the sandwich, her hands trembling as she unwrapped it. She didn't speak, didn't thank him, didn't make any kind of acknowledgement. She just started eating. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Riley didn't press her for details. He didn't ask why she was alone, or where her parents were, or what had brought her here. It wasn't the time for questions. It was the time for listening, for being present. Max, sensing the girl's unease, nudged her gently with his nose. She looked down at the dog, her expression softening just a little. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on her lips, just barely, but it was there. A small, quiet smile that said more than any words could. Riley watched the little girl, his gaze steady, trying not to let his mind race with the thousands of questions he wanted to ask her. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she alone in the park in the early hours of the morning? But he didn't ask. He simply sat there, letting her eat, letting the moment breathe. The wind rustled through the trees, and Max sat patiently beside them, his watchful eyes scanning their surroundings, as if expecting something to break the stillness. It was almost as if the dog knew, in some deep, unspoken way, that this moment was important, that something significant was unfolding, something that Riley himself wasn't fully prepared for. Riley could feel it too, the unease, the building sense of tension in the air. This wasn't just about a girl asking for food. It wasn't just about her hunger. It was something deeper. The girl's silence, her shyness, and the vulnerability in her posture. They all pointed to a kind of fear, one that Riley recognized far too well. It wasn't just hunger she was hiding. It was something much darker, something that had been brewing inside of her long before she had approached him. He shifted on the bench, trying to control the storm of thoughts that had started to swirl in his mind. His military training, the discipline drilled into him over the years, told him to remain focused, to stay alert. He had faced danger head-on many times before, been on the battlefield where decisions had to be made in an instant. But here, in this peaceful park, with this child sitting beside him, Riley felt a kind of helplessness that he couldn't shake. It was a strange thing, really. this feeling of being caught between two worlds. He had survived the chaos of war, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of helplessness when it came to someone who was so innocent, so vulnerable, a child, sitting beside him, asking for food, asking for comfort. He tried to push the unease aside, but it lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. What was going on with this girl? Was she lost? Why hadn't she spoken up earlier, called for help, or gone to her family? There was something about the way she had approached him, her hesitance, the way she looked down at the ground when she spoke, that suggested she was no stranger to hardship. Riley's mind drifted back to his time in the service, the children he had seen in war zones, starving, scared, lost in the chaos of conflict. His heart had broken for them, but at least then, he could do something. He could fight, he could protect, he could take action. But here, in the quiet of a suburban park, Riley felt powerless. The military had taught him to face danger head-on, to react quickly, decisively. But there was no enemy here, no clear line of action. This wasn't war. This was real life, messy and unpredictable, with no neat solutions. And then, just as quickly as the thought had crossed his mind, the girl looked up at him again, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. It was as if she could sense his internal conflict. The way she looked at him made Riley realize something he hadn't fully understood until that moment. She wasn't just hungry. She was scared. Scared in a way that no child should ever feel. Her gaze lingered on him, but she didn't speak. The silence between them grew heavy, laden with unasked questions, with the unsaid fear that hung in the air. Riley could see the hunger in her eyes, but it wasn't just for food. It was for something else, something deeper. It was the hunger for safety, for security, for comfort, something that Riley, despite all his training and all his experience, wasn't sure how to give her. Max, sensing the change in the atmosphere, moved closer to the girl. His ears were still perked, his body low, but the dog wasn't aggressive. He was simply there, a steady presence. The dog's calmness seemed to reassure the girl, who had been holding herself tense, like a tightly wound spring. Slowly, she reached down and touched Max's fur. The dog leaned into her touch, and for a brief moment, the tension in the girl's body seemed to melt. Riley watched the interaction carefully. He could tell that Max had a way of reaching people, especially those who were vulnerable. His dog had been trained to assist him in every situation, but Riley also knew that Max was more than just a service dog. He was a lifeline. Max had been through the worst of the worst with him, had seen the horrors of war, had kept him grounded in ways that no human could. And now, he was doing the same thing for this little girl. Riley felt a strange pang of recognition. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a bridge, a way to reach out to the human soul when words failed. And in this moment, with the girl sitting there, trembling, trying to process everything, it was clear to Riley that Max wasn't just comforting her. He was giving her a piece of something she needed, something Riley couldn't give her alone. Riley took a deep breath, pushing aside the dark thoughts that threatened to cloud his mind. He focused on the present, on this girl, on her quiet request for food. He couldn't turn away from this, not when she had placed herself in his care, so openly, so vulnerably. Without thinking, he reached into his bag again and pulled out another sandwich. He handed it to her, this time without hesitation. She looked up at him for a moment, as though unsure whether she should accept it. But then, slowly, she reached out and took it, her fingers trembling as she unwrapped the sandwich. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The simple act of offering her food, of showing her kindness, was enough. The girl took a small bite, chewing slowly. Riley didn't rush her. He sat there, silently watching her, giving her the space she needed. The world felt different now. There was a shift in the air, a sense of responsibility that Riley hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about sharing a meal. This was about being there for someone, being present in a way that transcended the noise of the world. Max stayed close to the girl, his gaze watchful but gentle. Riley couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the dog. He had always known Max was special, but in this moment, Max's ability to connect with others, to comfort them without question, seemed almost miraculous. As the girl ate, Riley felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just the act of feeding someone. It was the realization that this girl, who had shown up out of nowhere, was carrying a story far too heavy for someone so young. He could see it in the way she ate, the way she moved, the way her eyes darted around, almost as if she were expecting something, anything, to go wrong. She wasn't just hungry. She was scared, lost and alone. Riley's heart went out to her. It was clear now that she wasn't just asking for food. She was asking for something far more significant. She was asking for safety, for reassurance, for a moment of peace in a world that had broken her. But Riley knew, deep down, that he couldn't provide her with everything she needed. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't a guardian. He wasn't even prepared for the emotional weight of the situation. He was just a Marine, a man who had learned how to fight, how to survive. But survival wasn't enough in this moment. She needed more than just physical safety. She needed someone to listen, someone to care, someone who could show her, if only for a few minutes, that she wasn't invisible. Max nudged the girl again, and this time, she looked at him. Her expression softened just a little, and Riley could see the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He didn't know what the future held for this girl. He didn't know where she had come from or what she had endured, but in this moment, with her sitting beside him, eating a simple breakfast, he knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. Riley sat in silence, watching the little girl as she ate the sandwich. Her hands, still trembling slightly, unwrapped the food with the careful precision of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. As she chewed, Riley noticed that she didn't look him in the eye. She kept her gaze fixed downward, as if trying to stay invisible. There was something so heartbreakingly familiar about her, even though he had never met her before. The way she seemed to shrink into herself, almost as if afraid that any sudden movement or word could shatter the fragile moment of calm they had created. Riley had seen this before, both on the battlefield and in the eyes of civilians caught in the crossfire. People who had learned to survive, not by fighting, but by retreating into themselves, shutting out the world to protect what little they had left. The girl's vulnerability hit him hard. She was no different from the soldiers he had served with, those who had returned from war broken, silent, unable to find their place in the world. The difference, of course, was that this child had never asked for any of it. She had no place on a battlefield, no place in the wars Riley had fought, and yet, here she was, facing her own battle, a battle of survival, a battle for her own safety and security. Riley shifted uncomfortably on the park bench, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that had taken hold of him. Max, his loyal German shepherd, lay at his feet, his eyes never leaving the girl. The dog was always alert, always aware of the smallest change in their surroundings. It was what made him such a good service dog. But Riley could sense that even Max was uneasy. There was something about the situation that didn't sit right, something that Riley couldn't put into words. He glanced down at his watch. It had been over an hour since the girl had approached him, and in all that time, she hadn't said a word about where she came from or why she was alone. Riley couldn't help but wonder what had led her to this park, to this moment. Was she running from something? Was she hiding from someone? Riley wasn't naive. He knew what happened to children in the world, especially children who ended up alone. He had seen it, had heard the stories. There were too many children who slipped through the cracks, who found themselves in dangerous situations without anyone to protect them. The thought of it twisted something inside him. He had spent his life fighting for a cause, for a nation. But this felt personal. This wasn't about duty or honor. This was about something far more fundamental: human connection, survival, and the bond between people who were lost, just trying to find their way. As Riley sat there, watching the girl, he felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't even tried to make her feel comfortable. He was a Marine, yes, but he was also just a man, struggling to connect in a world that had moved on without him. He realized he had spent the past several minutes quietly watching her, observing her in silence, as if waiting for her to speak first. But she didn't. He had been so caught up in his own thoughts, in his own confusion, that he hadn't even considered the fact that the girl might need something more than food. She needed reassurance. She needed safety. She needed someone to show her that the world wasn't all dark, that there was still kindness in it. And in that moment, Riley realized that he wasn't just offering her a meal. He was offering her something deeper, a glimpse of hope, of humanity, of someone who cared. "What's your name?" Riley finally asked, his voice soft but steady. The girl hesitated for a moment, still not looking at him. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then picked at the edges of the torn dress she was wearing, her fingers fumbling nervously. It was as if she wasn't sure if she should trust him, or if saying her name would somehow make everything real. "Emily," she said quietly, almost in a whisper. Her voice was small, fragile, as if speaking it aloud required a great deal of effort. Riley could hear the weight of her words, the layers of sadness and fear hidden beneath them. "Emily," Riley repeated, nodding gently as if to acknowledge her presence. "You're safe here, you know." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were inadequate. She didn't need empty reassurances. She didn't need words that made her feel like she was a charity case, something to be pitied. She needed trust. She needed to feel that she could rely on him, even if just for this brief moment in time. She needed to know that she wasn't alone, that there was someone in the world who saw her, who recognized her humanity. He didn't know how to do that. How could he? What could he possibly offer to someone who had been abandoned, who had been left to fend for herself in a world so cruel? Max, sensing the tension, lifted his head and nudged Emily's leg gently. The girl flinched at first, but then her hand hesitantly reached down, her fingers brushing Max's fur. Riley could see the change in her face. For the first time, she relaxed a little, her shoulders no longer drawn tight, her body no longer a ball of tension. The dog had a way of doing that, of making people feel like they weren't alone. Riley had always believed in the power of animals, but Max had shown him time and time again how deeply they could affect others, how much comfort they could bring. Max was more than just a dog. He was a bridge to people's hearts. As Emily continued to pet Max, Riley turned his gaze to the park around them. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their leaves rustling softly. The sun had risen higher, casting long shadows on the ground, the light filtering through the branches like golden threads. Everything seemed so calm, so peaceful, and yet the quiet tension between him and Emily was palpable. The world was moving on around them, but in this small corner of the park, it felt like time had stopped. Riley wasn't sure how long they sat there together, but felt like hours, even though the sun had barely moved across the sky. Emily finished the sandwich, but she didn't leave. Instead, she sat there beside him, Max by her side, her body still trembling slightly, but less so than before. Riley had been waiting for her to speak, for her to ask something, for her to tell him what had brought her here, but she didn't. She just sat there, quietly, like she had nowhere else to be, like she had no place else to go. The silence grew thick between them, and Riley couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was hiding something. There was a heaviness in her silence, an unspoken story that she wasn't ready to share. Riley could see it in the way she held herself, closed off, unwilling to expose the rawness of her reality. There was a sense of defeat in her posture, a kind of weariness that spoke volumes without a single word. Max, sensing the shift in the air, stood up and walked a few paces away, his eyes still trained on Emily. Riley watched the dog, who seemed to be looking for something, searching the surroundings with a calm but determined gaze. It was then that Riley realized how attuned Max was to the world around him. The dog wasn't just there to provide comfort. He was always alert, always aware of his environment. And now, it seemed, Max was trying to understand why the girl felt so uneasy, why she had appeared out of nowhere, and why she seemed to carry such a heavy burden. Riley could feel his pulse quicken. There was something off about this whole situation, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Was she running from someone? Was she hiding from something? Was she lost? Or had something happened to her? Something she wasn't ready to talk about? Emily, Riley said again, this time a little firmer, trying to break the silence. Are you running away from something? Is there someone after you? She flinched, and for a moment, Riley thought she might bolt, might run away from him in a panic. But instead, she just shook her head, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly blinked away. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know where to go. I don't have anywhere else to be. And with those few words, the weight of Emily's fear became all too clear. She was alone, truly alone. The world outside of the park, the world beyond this brief, fleeting moment of safety, had become a dark, uncertain place. Riley had seen it before, the kind of desolation that left people with nowhere to turn, no one to trust. But in this moment, Riley realized that he had a choice. He could send her away, tell her to go back to wherever she had come from, or he could offer her the only thing he had left, a safe space, a moment of peace, and the quiet promise that someone cared. Riley wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for now, all he could do was listen, and that was something that no one, not even war, could take away from him. The park remained eerily quiet. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for something significant to happen. Riley sat still on the park bench, Max at his feet, his eyes fixed on Emily. She, on the other hand, seemed to shrink further into herself, as though trying to disappear into the ground beneath her. Her body trembled once more, and Riley could see her hands gripping the edges of her torn dress, as if trying to hold herself together. It was an unsettling sight. Riley had spent his entire life surrounded by chaos, explosions, gunfire, the acrid stench of smoke and death. But this was something entirely different. This was the silence of a child lost in a world that didn't seem to care. And Riley, despite everything he had faced, didn't know how to fix it. Max, ever the loyal companion, leaned against Riley's leg, his warm body offering silent support. The dog had been his anchor, his lifeline, throughout everything he had endured. But now, as Max sat by his side, Riley realized that the dog wasn't just here for him. He was here for Emily too, and that realization hit him harder than anything he had ever experienced. Riley's eyes flickered back to Emily, and in the soft morning light, he saw something in her face that he had seen in so many others before. A fear so deep, so entrenched, that it rendered her speechless. She was afraid of something that Riley could only guess at. But whatever it was, it had shaped her into this quiet, broken child who had wandered into his life for reasons he still didn't fully understand. Emily. Riley's voice was soft and now quieter. He didn't want to push her, didn't want to make her feel cornered, but he had to know more. He had to understand why she had appeared here, why she was so clearly carrying a burden that seemed too heavy for her small shoulders. You're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm not going to hurt you. Emily looked up at him then, her eyes wide and filled with something Riley couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like a plea, a silent request for him to understand. Understand what? Her pain, her past, her struggle. I'm not scared of you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm scared of what happens next. The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, Riley didn't know how to respond. He had been expecting her to say something about her life, her family, why she was alone. But this was different. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of the unknown. She was afraid of the future. And in that moment, Riley realized how much weight there was in her words. Max shifted his position, resting his head on the ground and gazing up at Emily with what seemed like a comforting look. Riley could feel the dog's steady presence, but he also knew that what Emily needed wasn't just the physical comfort of the dog. She needed something deeper. She needed someone to reassure her that the world wasn't always as dark as it seemed. Tell me what happened, Riley said, his voice quiet but insistent. You don't have to tell me everything all at once, but I need to know what brought you here. Emily's face crumpled, and Riley saw the tears well up in her eyes before she could blink them away. She bit her lip, and for a long time, there was nothing but the sound of her uneven breathing. Riley felt his own heart tighten as he watched her, his instincts kicking in. He wanted to reach out, to wrap his arms around her, to offer her the kind of protection he knew she desperately needed. But he knew better than to push too hard. She wasn't ready. Emily began, but her voice broke, and she choked back a sob. Riley's heart ached, and he leaned forward, closer to her, as if his presence could somehow ease the pain she was holding in. I don't know where my mom is, she whispered. I don't know if she's still alive. The words hit Riley like a punch to the gut. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this was something he hadn't prepared for. The sadness in Emily's voice, the raw grief that she had carried with her. He could hear it in every syllable, and it made him feel helpless. You've been looking for her, haven't you? Riley said, his voice steady, trying to keep his own emotions in check. For how long? A long time, Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't remember when she left. She said she'd be back soon, that everything would be okay. But she never came back. I waited every day. Riley swallowed hard, fighting back the emotion that threatened to rise in his chest. His own memories of loss, of soldiers who had never come back, flooded his mind. But this was different. This was a child who had been left behind, alone in a world that had turned its back on her. Do you have anywhere to go? Riley asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Emily shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears that she refused to let fall. She wiped them away with the back of her hand, looking down at her dirty, bare feet. Riley didn't need to ask any more questions. He understood now. The fear in her eyes wasn't just about the unknown. It was about being abandoned. It was about having nothing, nowhere to turn, no one to trust. For a moment, Riley was silent, his thoughts racing. What could he do for her? He wasn't equipped for this. He wasn't a social worker or a counselor. He wasn't even sure if he was capable of offering the kind of protection she needed. But he knew one thing. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't leave her here, alone and scared. His heart ached for her. He could see the way she clung to the smallest shred of hope, the way she looked at him like he was her only lifeline. And in that moment, Riley knew that he had a responsibility. He had a choice. He could be the one to help her, to give her the safety she needed, or he could turn his back, let her slip away into the unknown. I won't leave you, Riley said softly, his voice filled with conviction. You're not alone anymore. Emily looked up at him, her face a mixture of disbelief and hope. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Riley said, his voice firm. "You don't have to be scared anymore. You're safe with me." And as he said those words, something inside Riley shifted. He wasn't just offering her a place to stay or food to eat. He was offering her something much more profound, a sense of belonging, a sense of protection, a sense that she was seen, that she was heard. Max stood up and trotted over to Emily, gently nuzzling her hand with his nose. Riley watched as the girl's face softened, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw a flicker of trust in her eyes. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, and it was enough. Riley stood up from the bench, his legs stiff from sitting for so long. He extended his hand to Emily, offering her a gesture of solidarity, of friendship. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly took it. "Come on," Riley said. "Let's get you someplace safe." They began to walk together, Max leading the way, Riley by Emily's side. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew that. Emily's journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in this moment, Riley realized something that had eluded him for so long. He wasn't alone either. He had Max, and now he had Emily. And for the first time in a long time, Riley felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Riley and Emily walked side by side, the park now fading behind them, replaced by the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood. The sound of Max's paws on the pavement was the only noise between them, the dog leading the way, his steady gait never faltering. Riley's mind was still reeling from the depth of what had just transpired. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected a small, seemingly insignificant moment to turn into something that would change his life forever. He hadn't expected a child, a stranger, to walk into his world and completely shift his purpose. He had been so caught up in his own struggles, in his own post-service confusion, that he hadn't even realized the extent of what it meant to truly help someone. And yet, here he was, walking down the street with Emily, a little girl who had no place to go, no one to turn to. Riley could see it now, clearer than ever. Emily wasn't just a kid who had wandered into the park looking for food. She was a survivor, a fighter. She had lived through something that most children should never have to endure. As they walked, Riley kept glancing over at her. She had started off so small, so hesitant, her every step filled with doubt and fear. But now, with each stride, he could see a slight change in her. She walked a little taller, a little more sure of herself. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Riley could feel it. There was a shift happening within her, a softening, a quiet acceptance that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Max, ever faithful, stayed a few paces ahead, his body alert, scanning their surroundings. Riley appreciated the dog's constant vigilance, his ability to read a situation with a level of precision that Riley himself had learned to trust. Max wasn't just there for protection. He was there to help them navigate this new chapter, to offer the calm reassurance that Riley knew both he and Emily needed. "Where are we going?" Emily's voice broke through the quiet, her tone tentative, but curious. Riley glanced down at her, offering a reassuring smile. "To my place. It's not much, but it's safe." Emily looked up at him, her expression still guarded, but now tinged with a hint of hope. "Is it far?" "Not too far," Riley said, keeping his voice calm. "We'll be there in no time." She nodded, her pace slowing slightly, as if she was absorbing the weight of what was happening. Riley could see her processing it all, her young mind trying to make sense of the reality she now found herself in. It was as if she was slowly allowing herself to believe that this wasn't a dream, that there was, perhaps, a way out of the life she had been living. For Riley, it wasn't so simple. He wasn't sure what he had signed up for when he offered his help. He wasn't sure what it meant to suddenly become responsible for a child who had been through something he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But as they walked together, the bond between them grew stronger. It wasn't just about protection or food. It was about something deeper, something far more profound. They reached Riley's apartment a few minutes later, a small but comfortable place on the outskirts of town. The building wasn't much to look at, a modest two-story structure with faded paint and a broken gate, but it was home. It had been home to Riley since he had returned from his last deployment, a place where he could try to piece his life back together. It wasn't much, but it had everything he needed. As they reached the door, Max trotted up the stairs ahead of them, his tail wagging slightly, as if signaling that they had arrived at a safe place. Riley unlocked the door, pushing it open and stepping inside. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that Riley had grown accustomed to, the kind of quiet that felt suffocating at times, reminding him of the isolation he had felt since returning from service. But today, This quiet felt different. It felt like a fresh start. "Make yourself at home," Riley said, stepping aside to let Emily in. She hesitated at the door, looking around cautiously as if unsure of what to do next. Riley could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was still holding herself back, still afraid of what might come next. "I don't have much," Riley continued, his voice softer now, "but it's a place to rest. You don't have to worry about anything right now. Just relax." Emily stepped inside, slowly, cautiously, as though testing the ground beneath her feet. She didn't say anything, but Riley could see the tension in her shoulders start to ease. She took a few tentative steps, her eyes scanning the room. There was nothing extravagant in space, just a small couch, a few mismatched chairs, a table, and few pictures on the walls. It was the kind of place that felt lived in, the kind of place that told a story of its occupant, a story of someone who had come home after a long battle, only to find that peace was harder to come by than he had anticipated. Riley closed the door behind them, then turned to Emily, who had found a spot on the couch and was sitting down, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked up at him, her face still a mixture of doubt and hope. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible, but Riley heard it. He nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe." Max jumped up onto the couch beside Emily, his large head resting on her lap, as if to offer comfort. Riley smiled faintly at the sight. Max had a way of reaching people, even without saying a word. It was his presence, his steady calm, that had always been the thing that grounded Riley in the darkest moments of his life. Now, it seemed like Max was doing the same for Emily. Riley moved to the small kitchen area and opened the fridge, pulling out a couple of cans of soup and some bread. He didn't have much in terms of food, but he could make something simple, something to help Emily feel like she wasn't in survival mode anymore. She didn't have to be hungry anymore. She didn't have to fight for the basics. She was safe now with him. He made them both a quick meal and sat down across from her, placing the food in front of her. Emily didn't reach for it right away, still hesitant. Riley took a bite of his own soup, watching her. He wasn't sure what to say. How do you comfort a child who had been abandoned by the world? How do you explain to her that she wasn't alone anymore, that she could trust him, that he wouldn't let anything happen to her? But as he sat there, watching Emily's eyes flicker between him and the food, something shifted. She wasn't as tense as she had been earlier. She wasn't as fearful. She was still guarded, still uncertain, but there was something in her posture, something in the way she held herself, now that told him she was beginning to let go of the weight she had been carrying for so long. Finally, Emily picked up her spoon, her hand steady now, and took a small bite of the soup. Riley didn't say anything, but he watched her, knowing that this small act, eating a simple meal, was the first step in a long journey of healing. "Thank you," Emily said again, this time a little more confidently. Riley smiled softly, his heart swelling with a strange mix of emotions. "You don't have to thank me. You're safe here, okay?" She nodded, her eyes filled with something new, something Riley hadn't seen in her before. It was a spark of hope, a spark that told him maybe, just maybe, they had both found something they didn't know they were looking for. And as they sat there together, in the quiet of his apartment, Riley realized that this was the start of something new, something he hadn't expected, but something he was ready to face, because now, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. They weren't alone, and maybe that was enough for now. If you believe in the power of kindness and the difference one person can make in another's life, hit that like button and share this story. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of what truly matters. See you in the next video.